Okay, so we're rolling, and it's May 28th, and the question is, how did you get here? Like, what's your ALF journey story? And rather than spend time at the beginning with intros, when you start your segment, if you could just share your name and where you're at, that would be awesome.
Cool. I'm David, and I'm one of the builders at Philly ALC, a new startup group in Philadelphia. We've got about 20 families. We're all branching off from the Philly preschool to do something with a little bit more process involved, and we're super excited about it. How did I get here? I got here because I went to grad school for theater, and while I was doing grad school for theater, they hooked me up with this class called creativity, and we were starting to teach all about creative process, which got me into a lot of the sort of psychological theories of creativity and creative process. Specifically, it got way into Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, author of Flow and other books like that. And his read on that was kind of, there's two big takeaways. One is the sort of the importance of creativity, both for like human survival and for human joy. And the other is the detriment that our current school system brings to human beings and creativity and becoming creative people. And so it started me looking for the better way to educate children in general, and my children in particular, to be creative people. And that is to say, people who thrive and survive and are happy in this rapidly changing world. And that brought me to the Sudbury model. I thought had discovered this brand new thing, and I was really excited about it. Also, I was I was researching that, I read about this thing called ALC, but that was in New York, and obviously, that was too far away. So, but there was a free school in Philly I found, and took 2 years trying to convince my partner that this is what we should do with our kids, and finally started there. And after a couple of years of it, loved 90% of it, but realized there's a little bit more to it. And after 2 years of being involved in self-directed education, I don't know, maybe the self-direction part was contagious, but then the obvious solution to when I rediscovered ALC again after looking it up and going, oh yeah, that. After one of our group meeting when we were all going, well, if not the free school, then what? ALC came up again. And at that moment, after, I don't know, thinking more about creativity, about being around schools, where realizing taking our own learning into our own hands is the entire point. The obvious solution seemed to be, well, if the ALC school that we want isn't here, we just better make one. And so here we are making one. That's what brought me here.
Hey, I'm Amber. I'm in Oklahoma City, and co-direct at Rivers and Roads ALC and Nature School. We have an early childhood program here too, age 3 to 7, that we're all one giant community functioning. We just wrapped up our first official full year. I had worked in progressive education before this. I got my degree in elementary education with an emphasis in political science. And then right out of college, I did World Teach with the Peace Corps. And so it's a little bit different than the Peace Corps. We could talk about that if you ever wanted to know about it. But I was in Tanzania, East Africa, working with their Ministry of Education, redeveloping their early childhood program, when I learned a lot about what is the colonization of education and what all that looks like. So that was a big eye-opening process for me that made me start really looking into how do people learn. So yeah, I started finding global groups and found ARROW, the Alternative Resource Organization. And so when I moved back to the States, continued working in progressive education in an elementary school here in Oklahoma, and started getting more active within ARROW, going to conferences. And that's really when I found out about Sudbury and how this wasn't a new thing or a new movement. Learned about self-directed education, learned about ALCs, and so started to implement some of those in my classroom where I was teaching at, when we realized this just can't be a part-time thing. You can't just have students have freedom or choice part-time, because that's going to be a mutiny. So Taryn and I, my partner, we stepped away from our school in 2016, and yeah, started doing Rivers and Roads and loving it and excited for the future.
Can I ask real quick,
Yeah.
since you just wrapped your first full year, if you think back to your September self from last year, is there anything you would have liked for her to know that you know now?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Probably more boundaries and understanding that no is sometimes a healthy answer. Just staying within the value set and not having to be a yes person to every individual's needs.
Thanks. And is there anything you want on record for your next September self, or February, depending how your world works?
But can we circle back to that? Can I think on that?
Yeah, sure.
I guess that means it's me. I'm Mel. I'm a facilitator at ALCNIC in East Harlem. And I'm about to wrap my second year as a facilitator. And I started out as a very idealistic 7-year-old who wanted to be the president, because I believed that was how I could make the most good in the world, good change happen. And I eventually went to college for that. I went to the Gallatin School at NYU, which is relevant not because I got into political science, actually because I got out of it and into education. And through that met Abby in a class where we talked to an old hippie about John Dewey a lot. And also read A.S. Neal, and I discovered the beginnings of my way into self-directed education. But also relevant to all this, I was the kid who was checking off all the boxes to do the right thing and wind up with a successful life. So I, did the honor roll, and then I went to college, and then I graduated from college. And instead of going into education, I actually come from a family of teachers, and I had just gotten a degree in how terrible it is to be in a public school right now, because the history of education is a trend towards industrialization, and we're all just making kids that are all supposed to be clone copies of one another and fit into this curriculum where you're tested to see if you're worthy, and all the stuff that I didn't agree with or believe in. So instead of going into education, I got a corporate job, and I worked in Times Square for 3 years in an office. And it took all of that, that 3 years of drudgery, for me to realize this is not what I want from my life at all. I've checked all the boxes, and I've gotten to this far in the journey, and I have no interest in this. And right around the same time I had that realization, I ran into Abby in the East Village. Literally ran into her out in the world one night, and she said she found the school, that she worked at the school that we used to talk about in college, and she had just been promoted to be the co-director, and they were looking to hire another facilitator. And I said, perfect, because I'm trying to quit my job right now. So I went and visited the school And I got there, and Abby said, "Oh, I'm fixing a shelf, so the kids will show you around," and proceeded to go back to fixing the shelf. And I got shown around by two teenagers and a 6-year-old who were so proud to show me like their school and what it was. And like that afternoon, I knew that that was what I wanted to do with my life. Went to a training that summer, quit my corporate job, moved, started school, had no idea what I was in for. But since then, a lot has changed for me in my life. And it's all been good, although it has not all been easy. But it's been really, I co-wrote the facilitation guide last spring with Nancy of Mosaic. I'm editing it now, a year more experienced, so it's interesting to see what my baby facilitator self thought was the world, and to see the places where I really got it and the places where I was still missing experience. And yeah, now I'm here on this call after 2 years, running 2 trainings in SAC this summer, one in New York with Ryan and one in California with Anthony. And I forgot the question that you asked Amber earlier, Abby. I was going to tag it on here at the end.
Yeah, I asked 2. It was, what do you wish someone had told, or do you wish you could have told your like baby facilitator self? And then also your like note for your future self, because summer happens and we forget all the things we were capable of this year.
Yeah. I think my note to both of those selves is the same, which is there is no substitute for doing it. That the language around the thing does not change much, but the way it feels changes a lot. And that you can trust yourself to go through it and do the work. Yeah, that's it for me.
I'm Anthony, otherwise known as Tony. I'm at Hartswood Agile Learning Center in Atlanta, Georgia. We just finished our 2nd year this past Friday. How did I get to this? I would say 2012, 2013. I had the first notion of like, oh man, I think I started to think about like starting a school, like how I could do school, how I could like start a school and do it differently, or what I would, and it grew from the seed of like what I would change about my own schooling experience, because at the time I was so fed up with the routine and how mundane college was, and wishing that I could have done that process differently and I'd have a different relationship with school and education, not just it being focused on getting the grade. So over the years, that idea or that thought of doing school better, doing it differently, changed into, here are all these other ways people are doing school differently. Here's how I want to do it at the moment. Oh, let me change that idea. And that idea kept evolving to the point of me being committed in 2014. I'm definitely going to start a school. And just circumstances, unintentionally, but happened to take me to a few different kinds of schools, progressive or SDE schools. And just that journey brought me back to Atlanta, where I wanted to start a school. And what's this school year? 2018, 17, so 17, 16. So in 2016, at the 2015-2016 school year, I was at Sudbury School of Atlanta. And then in 2016, that's when we started Hartwood Agile Learning Center. So just over those few years of me being really focused or dedicated to like pursuing this version of doing school, yeah, that's the quickest version of that story. Abby, are there details that I should provide or that I'm missing? Is that like too pretty and cute? Should I add some of the grunge in there?
What do you think?
um, I think that's just how I got to starting in ALC. It's just the motivation or the desire to do school differently / better, or create a type of school that I wish I had went to.
I'm curious about both what that process has been like for you, and about the like pockets in between schooling where younger Anthony like self-directed, maybe before you like had the words to call it that. Like where you were practicing before you knew you were practicing.
Yeah. So when I was in Bloomington, Indiana at IU, supposed to be pursuing a PhD in school psych at the time. But the second semester I withdrew, and like it was thought that it was going to be temporary. I knew it would be permanent. And I think at that time I didn't have coursework, and I was committed to starting the school. I had been more actively and energetically researching like the education system in America, and finding out about all these different things and looking up different components of history. And that's just about school and different child care laws and board of education laws, whatever, and stuff about accreditation. And coincidentally, that led me to, I was also like self-directing and learning about stuff that wasn't related to starting a nonprofit or a school at all. I I know one of my greatest fixations at the time was astronomy, like the actual trajectory of the moon in space, like how its path doesn't look how we would normally think it looks like. Yeah. So there was that process when it started, and I look back on that and I'm like, oh wow, that was me deschooling / self-directing my learning at that point. I wasn't doing it for a grade. Somebody would call or say, hey, what did you do today? And I was like, I'm researching something. And it was just funny that I was calling research because it wasn't for school. It wasn't for paper or anything. I'm running and researching for my own like joy and for my own desire, not to satisfy anybody else. And it was pretty sure the first time that I'd done that deeply and that long in a very long time. Yeah.
And what do you wish your baby facilitator self had known?
I would advise my younger self to speak up more and communicate more, or challenge. I would, speak up more and challenge myself to communicate more, and be willing to test the boundaries or the walls of what is enough, not enough, too much, rather than playing it super safe. There was the other one about the future. I can't remember.
There is. I'm going to give you an extra one, though, just because I know a little bit about your world, and ask if there's anything you would have told your like younger facilitator self about, like specifically about being one of the co-directors at a school, and kind of the back end of what your workload is like and what tending all those relationships is like.
I think I would tell myself, one, you can't do all the things. And the people in your community are as enthused as you and they want to help, but they're not your employees. They are your partners. as well. Oh, I lost the other thought. You can't do all the things. And, learn how to prioritize or let things go. Yeah, I can't remember the other thing, but I think that's good. I'd flourish from just that piece.
The other question is, do you have anything you want on record for your, I've been saying September self, but you go back to school in mid-August, fresh off the California training. So memos for your next year self? Or did you please? Okay. Tony froze. We can circle back to him. Amber, did you find the thought you had lost before we move on?
I don't know if we start back August 1st. So if you want to know, that's how Oklahoma City does year round. I'm not sure why, but August, what do I want my August 1st self to know? That nothing other people do with whether they come in personal. It's all about where they're at in life. And so to take my ego out of this community, that if people are coming or going, that's all about them, and that I am not the savior of the people.
Awesome. Anthony messaged he's back. Although Tony, you still look kind of frozen. Are you back? Oh, you're back. Great. Do you have a memo for your next year self?
Like something to remind myself of.
Mm-hmm.
Make a list of the things. Get the stuff out of your head. Write it down somewhere. Pick one. Focus on it. Finish it. Multitasking does not exist. Task switching is just the worst. Yeah. Pick a thing, focus on it. Everything's important, yes. Everything has to get done, yes. But you can't solve all the problems right now. You can only solve one. So pick one, give it all your time and energy, and then move on to the next after that. And don't feel bad about failing.
Awesome. Thank you. And that just leaves me. So I'm Abby, and I am one of the co-directors at Agile Learning Center. So the New York school, that's the flagship. And that's finishing its 5th year. Cool. And I also was at a meeting this morning because I'm currently finishing my first year as vice president of the global network, which has me researching and learning all kinds of things that I never thought I'd be Googling, like what are the laws for starting a nonprofit in Mexico? Like who donates their airline miles to nonprofits so that we can get a retreat together next year when we've got a bunch of people on like startup budgets. So that's super exciting. I, like Mel, started as a super curious kid. I wasn't necessarily looking to like change the world, but wanted to like be a force for good, like where I was. And was fortunate to have of my mom really be like, let's go to the library and I'll just leave you at the library for hours. Or like, oh, you're interested in science, like go talk to the neighbor who's a science teacher, or like run around in the backyard and like here's some books about bugs, just like pay attention to nature, ask people questions, be in relationship, read everything. And the story when I went to kindergarten, like to school, was that this was the place I could learn more things than I could at home, because there were going to be more resources. There would be teachers whose whole job was to help me learn the things I wanted to learn. And I was super stoked. And then I was really disappointed when I got to kindergarten and it was about like sitting next to a kid I wasn't excited to sit next to because I saw how he treated people, but like I had to override my gut because like the teacher said so. And it was about coloring in balloons the right color and how well we could stand in line and all this stuff that like, you know, I was really into entomology right then. I was reading myths and fables from around the world. I was not trying to like color pictures of balloons. And it took most of my schooling for me to realize that that story about school being the place to learn more stuff was a story. Like, because the school was divided into levels and I was in a school that was like spread out in a couple buildings across the steel town in Pennsylvania, there was this idea that like, well, when I got to the next building or the next phase or the next level, that's when school would become the place where I could learn what I wanted. Like I would have enough of the basics. And I believed that for a really long time. And so just found ways to keep learning what I wanted to inside sometimes and around my classes. But a lot of my memories of school were like the moments I was doing that, or the moments where like, because I finished all my homework in a different class under my desk or on the bus or whatever, I could then go to the barn where I worked with horses and like listen to the old people talk, or what, you know, go read whatever thing I was reading. And so when I got to high school, I was looking for like, what are the kinds of jobs that let me do the things I'm interested in? And I was looking at stories still. I was looking at history and I was looking at politics and I was looking at how does social change happen? What do people believe? How do they decide what they believe? And I went to apply for a summer scholarship program that we had in Pennsylvania called Governor's School. And they didn't have a history one, so I applied for their teaching one, figuring like through teaching I'd get a set of skills that I could apply like in any context. And maybe college really was a place where people could learn what they wanted. And then that would be cool, because if I could teach college, it would mean I could be in dialogue with my students and help them have the thing that I had wanted, while also like, you know, there weren't really academics in my world, but because it was a steel town, but like I had this idea that academics got to keep studying stuff, and I was excited about that. So I went to Gov School and learned all about like the history of the education system and all of the aspirations for public schools in terms of like, how do we accommodate migrant workers and speakers of other languages and blind students and deaf students and, you know, students with all these different needs, students with kids. Like, how do we design schools really that are smaller communities that like account for the whole humanity of our kids and support them? And that program was really awe-inspiring because I got to like sit with other people and design a dream school district that would like had a garden and a bunch of stuff. But it was also really tricky because I, again, heard all these teachers, and as I'd been hearing my teachers speaking these dreams and feeling stuck in how the testing and the standards and like their workload didn't let them act on any of these ideas they had. So I got out and I went to college and I went to the Gallatin School at NYU with this idea that I was going to design my major about storytelling, and it was going to be the stories that are in our textbooks and the curation of our museums and in our communities and our cultures, to shape like what's in school and also like expand the learning. Like I wanted to know why school had gotten narrowed to what it got narrowed to and how we could reverse that. I ended up like studying Soviet education systems and like how they transitioned to being like countries in Eastern Europe when they like got occupied, how their education systems and museums changed, and then a bunch of stuff that like seems unrelated but has actually been super useful in my facilitation life, both in terms of like being able to talk to kids about it and then in terms of looking at like how social change happens and how movements happen. And so I did all that, took that class with Mel at NYU, and through that class ended up with an internship at the Brooklyn Free School, and was like, this is sweet, this is the thing I was wanting, like I don't have to create it, someone's already done it. And I walked in and some parts were awesome, and then some parts felt really, really hard. Like the focus, and I've learned since it's the democratic free school focus on like, you know, we make the rules, we the kids in it have power to make rules, led to this like power over kind of mindset to their rule making. And it was strange because like I walked in to kids being like, well, you can't tell us what to do. And I was like, whoa, I wasn't gonna try. And so that was disappointing, but I learned a lot from it. And through that, I met Alex Coast, who was a parent at the school. And he was running a truly self-directed, just play-based summer camp. And so I like talked to him, ended up doing like running the summer camp with him. And then, you know, hustled, picked up a bunch of New York City jobs to like be able to stay in the city. And like I'd worked in a preschool through, what's it called, Jumpstart, and I'd like taught English as a foreign language in a school in the Caucasus. I had done tutoring at a, what do you call them, like a community center downtown. So I'd been in education for a while, like practicing. But coming out of the Brooklyn Free School and then the summer camp, one of my gigs was at a charter school after school project-based learning program. And at the same time, I was volunteering at the Agile Learning Center during its first year. Because Alex had said at some point during a check-in, like, hey, if you're moving uptown, you should check these guys out. And it was literally check these guys out. Like I went to their info session and walked in and there were like 4 white men on a couch. And at the Brooklyn Free School, I'd like been working with like queer people and people of color and lots of women. And I was not excited about being in the middle of East Harlem with 4 like white dudes. But like, because I trusted Alex, I stayed. And I like brought all my hard questions from being disillusioned with the Brooklyn Free School, and they answered them. It was like Thomas and Ryan and Bear and Art, and they gave me like really good answers to all my questions. So I stayed, so I kept volunteering, and by December had like burnt out on and quit my charter school job and was volunteering semi full-time while I like hustled in the evenings. Tony, I see your note about being detailed. Yeah, dude, be as detailed as you want. Mel's also laughing at me because I usually like ask other people for their stories and don't do mine, so I'm like not practiced. And yeah, so I facilitated, volunteer to help grow the school so that it could hire me. And Thomas was the director at the time, and we had that conversation where he was like, yeah, you know, we can't hire you until we grow. And I was like, cool. So we did that, and then I was a facilitator the following year. And as Thomas met Nancy and moved his world more and more to Charlotte, Ryan and I ended up stepping up to co-direct the school, and I took on a bunch of the administration. And started kind of transitioning, trying to get the school out of the stage of like striving to exist into a place where it was like clear that it existed, and being intentional and looking for how to better support both the people in our community locally and in our community, rapidly growing community around the world. Which is how 2 Octobers ago I started getting involved with the network stuff, because I was like, oh, right, we've run a training in New York now. What else can we do? And then network organization, like by that point I had learned a bunch about how nonprofits operate really quickly to be able to run the New York school, and looked at the network and was like, oh, a nonprofit, this feels familiar. So got involved in trying to figure that out and like guide it through this transition 1.5 year period that it's in. And here we are. That's it. That was a lot.
That was really awesome. And it made me wonder, like, have a question for Amber and Tony maybe, but what was your school self like? Like, I think that was a really interesting dimension that you added, Abby, when you started out. Like, what was your preschool self like? What were you like before you were schooled? And then how was your schooling experience? Because I think it's a very interesting, I think it's relevant to being, I wasn't unschooled. I went to my local public school, and like I said, I was really into it. I did a lot of extracurriculars, and I was in the marching band and choir, and I did all the musicals, and like really threw myself into school. But before school, and that part of it was great. Before school, I was a really curious kid, but I was also shy and remained shy in school, and wound up learning to hide a lot of parts of myself, which is, I think, interesting for a pink-haired person to say. But I wasn't always a pink-haired person. I really, one of the lessons I took away from school was that your true self is something that you should keep to yourself, because it's a place where other people are going to make fun of you. And that's a lesson that took a really long time to unlearn. Anyway, your story made me think of that. And maybe Amber and Tony want to tell us a little bit about what their school selves were like.
Yeah, I really enjoyed school because I had a pretty relaxed childhood, as far as like my parents could care less about grades or the importance of it, and so I never had any of that pressure. I don't know, I did a lot of extracurricular things. As far as like any time I was interested in something, my parents just supported me 3,000%, and so I was just always doing something. Yeah, preschool me, it's interesting, as we like kids will play with toys, or they'll like Disney movies will get brought up, and it's like I had to double check this with my mom. I was like, what toys did I play with? Because I didn't play with dolls or Legos, or never seen any of the Disney movies. She was like, yeah, it's because you were too busy talking to people all the time. So I was very just like always a studier of humans. I've always been fascinated by people's stories and what makes them them. I love listening to people. I want to know more about them. And so, yeah, and I had younger siblings, so I was constantly able to, use them as my projects and practice all those leadership skills. Yeah, and then I guess, yeah, some of the hard lessons that just came with the school system is like I was never a people pleaser, and so that was hard. I think wanted to talk all the time, and so that makes you a bad student. And it's so, or like a lot of gender stuff that gets thrown in there, like the boys in Amber doesn't act like a typical girl, like things thrown in like that throughout elementary. That was just like, luckily I had the support of a very hippie mom that was like, oh yeah, that's not a thing. But, you know, as time and time went with that, I guess I wanted to try to shift that and learn to be quiet. And so that's been a real interesting part of my deschooling, is like, what does it mean to just be me and not start, when I did shift to people pleasing, like after schooling, and I know that came from there. But yeah, and then in high school, I felt like middle school was the really obnoxious time of like, the teachers were hardcore and there were so many rules to prepare you for high school constantly. Like, well, just wait. Like, we started writing in cursive and having perfect handwriting and not talking so we could be prepared for this high school. And then we went and it was so easy and so fun to me. I don't know, nothing was challenging. I was like, did I even go to a real school? Because I never had homework. I just remember walking out whenever I wanted and doing whatever I wanted. So yeah, I don't feel like I learned anything that way. And so that's why, in a classroom setting, so I think that's why self-directed education like makes a lot of sense to me. And as far as like that aspect, I've never questioned it. It's always made a lot of sense, because everything that I feel like is useful in my life now didn't come from a classroom.
So as I kind of remember, and as my older sister and parents report, my older sister's 5 years older than me, and I was super eager to start school because she would go to school and come back from school, and I just thought it was like the thing to do. So she would come home and we would actually play school, and she would like let me work out of her workbooks and homework. I do have memories of that. So to my knowledge, I was always excited about school as a kid. And even then, like, I was like, it was just where friends were. It was fun. The activities were, as I recall, challenging enough to feel like inspiring or for me to be motivated, but not like, nothing was too hard or ridiculous that I felt bad about myself. So I was always good at school. And over time, I equated that to, in school reinforced it by putting me in like talented and gifted programs that like, oh, I'm smart. Like, I'm good at school. I'm like really bright and really intelligent. And like brighter and more and smarter than like other people. And so maturing from preschool to early elementary to like late elementary, started to get the message of like grades are what's important. So I think from there started to adapt the habit of like making sure I did what's necessary to get the A. So I was still really good at school and I was still smart, but I started to switch over to like getting the A, which started to become different than like just knowing stuff and having information or being able to think about things in a certain way. So middle school happened, high school happened, and I still like really enjoyed school, but now we're at a point where academics are much more serious. So like I would hate to miss a day of school for something because you end up falling behind in information or lessons and stuff. So it's like that is more one of the reasons why I always wanted to go to school, because I just hated the negative side effect of like having to miss a day or something. But then also, again, huge social component. Like that's where my friends were in high school. I got involved in a lot of clubs and activities, and come my junior, senior year, I was staying after school for something all the time, sometimes for no real reason, just because like that's where community was. That's where like myself as a young person with my full whole identity was. But the social aspect took a bigger role for me. And then my not having study skills because I didn't need them caught up to me. where I started to need study skills, and I started to need to actually like take time to really read the information and digest it. It wasn't just stuff that I could like, okay, got that, got it, that's easy, that's simple. So school got a little harder in that I had to put more effort into it, and I just didn't know how to do that before. And so my grades kind of like stumbled a bit, it was enough, they stumbled a bit or enough to catch my parents' attention. So they ended up having to come up to the school, and like this had not, I mean, my parents didn't have to come up to the school since like my freshman year of high school. This was late 11th grade, I think. Just because, you know, my grades were great and I kind of kept them at a distance. And I didn't tell them about PTA or conferences or anything like that. I didn't deliver the school calendar home at all. So, yeah, graduated, you know, still thinking like, oh, I do pretty great academically. I'm still really smart. In fact, smarter than most people because, again, I'm in all of these accelerated programs. Get into college, pretty much the same thing. You know, I'm busting out 4.0s. But this time around, I'm not super social. Because it's college and it's really game time and it's like time to make sure that my whole future is set. I'm hyper focused on academics and grades and don't put anything into like socialization very much. I have like this one activity that I was in my scholarship program, and that's where I started to dedicate my time outside of class. I really enjoyed it. It was a community service-based scholarship, and there was a lot of like mentoring going on and servant leadership development, stuff like that. And like I took positions in the organization just throughout the years. And at some point, something switched over where I just got super tired of the routine of school. Like it just wasn't satisfying. It's like, oh man, I think there were points where I would interact with people who were bad students, but they knew stuff. They could tell you details about like certain aspects of the economy or history or political science, but they were like bad students. And so it reflected back on me. I thought, wow, I thought I was really smart. I thought I was smarter than most people. My grades are better than other people's. I wouldn't even say I'm a great student. Somehow I get good grades. But like, I can't say any of that stuff. I don't know any of the stuff that these people are reporting. And so that's when it kind of hit me that, wow, I've been getting A's this whole time, but I've not been learning anything. So I think that's when it hit me also around like junior, senior year, where I started to think, I wish I could go back and do school differently. Like, I wish I could create a better school. So that's where that seed kind of started that I guess we just previously talked about. And I know you said something, Abby, that reflected back from my experience where I felt like college, when I was in college, I felt like school and classwork was actually the thing that was in the way of me doing what I actually wanted to do. And that was being the senior intern, which is basically like being the president of this organization that I was in. I wanted to devote like my full time and energy into that and mentoring and helping community service programs and just maintaining the health of the organization and the community of it. Like that's where I thrived. I loved it. And it felt so good to be with like those people who like really depended on your leadership and like who were inspired. Like that was really great, lovely feedback to have. And yeah, I was like, man, stupid class. Like I want to give my energy and stuff to this programming, this retreat, this conference. I don't want to sit here and think about or study for some abnormal psychology test, which I love abnormal psychology. It's just the test was unnecessarily difficult. Or like my 2-hour-long statistics class. So yeah, that's what my schooling was kind of like. It went from super enthused about school, loving it. It became a social place. I'm really good at this. Oh, I need to be like focused on this part of it, not the learning part of it. Getting super social again focusing on the performance and not the learning, and learning to deprioritize socialization. And then now academics just getting in the way of me feeling like satisfied with my life. and that was through college. I attempted grad school, but that was for the purpose of starting an ALC, really, which, as we can see, is not necessary. Might even be underqualified with a PhD.
Well, thanks for that. Mel, do you have a thought?
I was just going to say that I love the idea that you're underqualified to start an ALC with a PhD.
One of my early SDE readings was Deschooling Society. And I don't remember much of it, but I clearly remember reading the part about graduate school being a siphon to take energy that would otherwise disrupt default culture's systems and put it in a place where it's not going to threaten anything. And I was like, oh, and I literally had partially completed, GRE study packets and whatnot on my desk that I just got rid of. So I'm like, yes, I feel that.
Yeah, well, schooling is about compartmentalization.
The most interesting thing to me is that when you look at the pioneers, or the fathers, never the mothers, fathers of certain academic fields and disciplines, they're never the person of one discipline. It's oh, Sir So-and-so, the father and pioneer, he was a biologist, an anthropologist, a psychologist, a mathematician. Wait, how are you so great at all these things? Why is that not possible?
Yeah, that. I recently learned that Carl Jung was really into astrology, and it's really justified a lot of my current hobby research projects. But I remember schooling doing that and being actually in my school, when you were 10, you had to pick art or music because there wasn't time in the schedule for you to do both art and music. And my name is Melody because I come from a family of musicians. And so I picked music. And it took me until 26 to start making art. And it turns out I really like that. But schooling was no, people do one of those things. And I believed it for a long time. Anyway, it got me thinking about it. Compartmentalization.
Well, Mel, I know you have to bounce in 7 minutes. Do you have questions, or do people have questions for you? Watching Amber think with her mic off.
I got to ask my question, so I am happy to answer any final questions you may have for me. Or if not, just leave you lovely humans to it.
What are you learning right now?
What am I learning right now? Ooh, that's a really good question. One of the things that I am learning is about astrology. I'm learning about what all the signs and the planets and their relationships to each other mean, and what that means for me and my work with young humans who tend to really strongly show the traits of their signs because they're not fully simmered like a soup left in the fridge overnight. I don't know. I've been using that metaphor a lot. I'm learning if that is working. I'm learning how to paint, which has been amazing. I'm learning about herbs in an effort to heal my body. I'm learning to trust myself, which is fun and terrifying. Yeah, I'm learning a lot of things right now. Oh, and I'm learning how to have how to be, figure out how to say this, how to sustain a prolific art making practice. I've been a writer for a long time, and I jump into various arts in bursts and spurts, but what does it mean to live as an artist long term every day? I'm trying to figure out that. So yeah. I'm trying to let people know. I'm keeping a blog. People should look at my ALC blog. I have published many posts on it in the last few weeks. It's Melody, MELODY, .agilelearningcenters.org. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Anthony and Amber, do you have questions for each other, for me, for the universe?
What are you learning right now, Abby? And what would you tell your September self?
One of the things I started learning, like I was schooled out of my voice in a lot of ways, and never in my confidence in myself to make decisions for myself, but in my confidence in myself to like see big things and make decisions, like to show up in the world as a presence and a force. And in different ways, my facilitation practice has constantly just been returning me to those lessons, a little more intensely each time. And so like I'm still learning those same things, but now instead of just like being in a room and like speaking out of turn to like name a dynamic and propose we adjust it, it's things like figuring out how to advocate with governments for policy changes to like legalize self-directed education spaces, and studying the shape of movements and reaching out to like organizations just based on my gut feeling that we like might have something in common and something we can like learn from each other. And I'm also learning how to teach people how to teach well, I guess, like how to scaffold things for different groups of people. So like I've been planning, organizing, and running events for a long time and trainings for the past 2 years. Like this year, very intentionally started working on how do I like be setting other people up to like play with me in a way where they learn all the skills that they need while I'm here to support them, so that then they can go more like faster and be better prepared to go do it on their own when they want. Which like I'm also doing at the school level and like with some work groups, and getting ready to do at the network level. Just trying to figure out how to like tend organizational culture in a way that's sustainable. So, a long answer to your question. But what are you learning?
What am I working on right now? Been really into the science of spiritual marketing. That's something that is really jamming with right now. And then also a lot of time trying to figure out where to develop my voice and how to focus and harness it. It's kind of interesting to talk about how confident I was all growing up, and then most early adulthood, and then this kind of like shift and almost like, oh, I can, in that kind of cycle that I'm in right now. So yeah, learning how to become that person again. That's what I'm working on.
It's a remembering, really. You already have all the tools you need.
Mm-hmm.
What are you learning, Anthony? Did your camera just zoom in?
Mm-hmm. That was a real office moment.
I just discovered The Office 2 months ago. Jim Halpert is my favorite character. What am I learning? Oh, through failure, how to maintain organization, I should say. I just cleaned my room and like actually did the entire thing, not just like certain aspects of it. I threw stuff away, did papers, filed stuff, digitized stuff, wiped and sanitized stuff, mop stuff. I never do every iteration or every version of cleaning all at once. And through that have realized like some of the things that caused me to trip up. What else am I learning? Oh, I am learning about, this is actually one of the lessons I would tell my previous self about like facilitating the entire community. How like, even though I only really wanted to facilitate the kids, that's just not how it works. The adults in some sense are also part of I also have to facilitate the adults. They're an essential part of it. I can't just deal with the kids and ignore the other grown people. So yeah, I'm learning that I have to do that, and I'm learning to do that better. I'm learning like how to take like the small time to just communicate like the small stuff. Because even though it seems like insignificant or goofy, I'm learning that on the other side, the parent has the experience of being in like frequent communication with facilitators about like their child's experience. And so that has had like a significant effect on like just parent interactions for my experience. I also am learning about some art stuff. I don't know where I'm at with that. I'm still trying to level up. My intention is to like super digivolve over the summer as an artist. So yeah.
Cool. Nice. Closing thoughts before I stop the recording.
Yes, I have a closing thought. I thought I did. If you don't become the sea, you'll be seasick every day. A quote by not me.
Leonard Cohen.
Yes.
Solid one. Thank you.